Hello and welcome to Ditching Hourly. I'm Jonathan Stark. Today I am joined by guest Joe Quadara. Joe, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you.
So, folks, today we are going to talk about Joe's experience with indie game consulting and finding a sweet spot where, in your own words, the work almost became too easy. So, I was really interested when you sent me that message. But first, could you tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, maybe the short version is, let's see, it's been 20 plus years of making video games. I was in college for graphic design and electronic music. And then it turned out that I realized video games as a career while I was in college. I was playing video games in the arcade, met some game designers, and asked them how they got started, and they all said it was QA, or quality assurance, aka testing.
Yep.
Um, and one of them said, Joe, you'd be really good at it based on the way that you play the game. Like it was fighting games. It's Street Fighter, Tekken, and there were things that I was doing in the game that really had nothing to do with winning. They had everything to do with breaking the game and turning the character the wrong direction and fighting away from the other players and just doing wacky things. And yeah, I already had done a lot of 3D work and 3ds Max in high school and Illustrator and in high school. And then when I was in college, I was looking for access to these, like they had silicon graphics machines. So this was like 98, 99,
Mm.
2000. And it was so funny. I remember peeking in through the doors of the classroom. This would be third year classes and into this program. And they were literally just like writing their names and just typing them in some font and then extruding it into 3D. And it's like, it was so basic in terms of what I could already do.
Wow.
And I was just like, can I get at least into these classes? And, and they were like, oh, no, you got to. And the one thing, like I did, I don't remember what their role is, like counselor or whatever. They said you can propose your own curriculum. So I proposed it and they just flat out denied it. But-
Jeez. Get your hopes up.
yeah, it was a whole like confluence of events, and I'm not going to get too into like the darkness or the sadness of it, but I found myself without financial aid and without ability to like continue school. And I just remember one guy that would show up on Wednesdays at Sunnyvale Golfland and playing Tekken and saying, yeah, you could do it. And I found him. I was like, okay, you said it. I'm here. I gave him my resume, and 4 months later, I got a call from the QA manager at a
Wow.
company, Crystal Dynamics. And it was like, I think it was $11 an hour to test video games. But the glory and the beauty of it was a small company that nobody cared who you were or how you got there. It was just like, you're here, great. Well, what can you do? We always need more work. And they were happy that I knew fighting games. And eventually I learned how to beat them all in Counter-Strike. So they respected me for that too. So they made me the combat and gameplay designer at some point.
Wow.
Yeah, like it was on. So it was designer, project manager. One last bit is I did make a Faustian deal with the producer that was just really good at managing everybody and on time. And he said, be a producer for me and I'll make you a designer later. And I did that, and I'm glad I did because it taught me how to like be efficient with time and think about like when to make decisions and when to make big decisions, like make them early, not make them late. And
Right.
that carried me forward for a long time.
Wild. Okay, so that's a big timeline. So you
Yeah.
said the it's Rex Storage story. So like,
Yeah, it really
just
is. Yeah.
yeah. So from the Sunnyvale video game parlor, that was you said that was like late '90s,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then so into when you started to when you felt like you kind of had the producer role under your belt, like what year would that have been?
I'd say producer role was about like 2006, and then I crafted what we now call gameplay designer on like the Tomb Raider titles, but like we didn't have that role before. That wasn't a title, so it was sort of like self-directed, a thing I could do, and then it segued that into like lead combat, lead gameplay, design director, etc. It was a it's a funny thing to be able to be in an industry and navigate through it. And I have plenty of peers that have done the same thing. So I'm not unique in this, but now there are people like going to school and getting and reading books about what I learned on the job.
Mm. Just totally cutting edge, brand new stuff.
Yep.
Just before we move into the sort of business aspects of the consulting, uh, how would you quantify the size of the market? Video games seem like there's a million of them, but compared to say like the number of Hollywood movies that come out in a year, how many video games come out in a year? Is it like way more, way less?
It's getting more every year. I think there was, and that's a large part of the like, I'm gonna mess up this word. I think the democratization of just tools for it gets easier and easier for younger and younger people to make, and fewer people to make games. Where
Smaller,
once
smaller teams.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like it,
Okay.
once it took like, like there was like we're literally inventing the technology, and then at some point the technology becomes sort of like there's a winning version of it, and there's an easier use or data pattern, and that gets ubiquitous and pushed out forward.
Hmm. Would you categorize things like, I've got like still pretty young kids. Would you categorize things like Roblox
Mm.
in-game stuff as games or no?
Oh, totally. Yeah, yeah. Like, and Roblox is amazing because it actually like exposes the players to the ability to change things and write their own, which is exactly what being a game designer or a game developer is. It's like being able to see the thing and saying, I wish it was a little bit different, and being able to go in there and change it. And I think that's like really important, is like not to take software as face value, is
Yeah.
being able to like see it as like, wow, I can, if I can dream it to be a little bit different, I can potentially change it.
Yeah, I don't have to just be a consumer, I can be a creator.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's very
Yeah,
important.
love that.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so is there like, is it a $1 billion market? Is it $100 million market?
Yeah, I think we're beyond the value of Hollywood at this point. So, I don't know the number. It's certainly over a billion because there are entire franchises that are $1 billion franchises.
Exactly.
Like Grand Theft Auto, for instance, is an outlier, but is easily a $1 billion franchise in itself. And there, of course, like six of them or whatever, like the six that's coming out probably in the next year or so. But um, we're talking multi-billions.
Yeah.
And and if you look at games across the demographics of it, it's actually fairly even across like genders as well, which is great. But it's when we have to open our minds in terms of games. It's not just all like fighting games and shooters and sports games. There's like The Sims, and there's Animal Crossing, and there's
Yeah.
and there's games on the phone, and like the mobile games has really taken off in the last 10 years, to the point where there's entirely new models, essentially, like in terms of like pricing and business models of, it's all based on platform and usage, really. But
Right.
it's highly lucrative. My personal gripe is that a lot of the time the developers do not really get to partake in the success of the games.
Okay, so that's a perfect segue into the consulting bit. What is indie game consulting? So like how do you define the two? Like they're going to be probably most people are, even if they're familiar with playing CS:GO or whatever, they're not familiar with the industry. So like what is an indie game studio in the first place, and what it versus what? Like a
Right,
person in
right.
their basement versus EA.
Yeah, we for a long time talked in the industry of uh the the big games that we all know, right? The Counter Strikes, the beyond Counter-Strike at this point. It's the Call of Duties, the Fortnites,
Fortnite, yeah.
um, all the big ones that we call those AAA. And the AAA, it's not really very easily definable, but if you really look at all of them, it's about the marketing budget and the budget of the development budget, right? So if you're talking about World of Warcraft or anything that Blizzard makes, Overwatch, uh, League of Legends, these are all games that are somewhere, I'd say minimum of 60 million. And that's like really a stretch because most of them probably touch $100 million to make. And then if they're taking $100 million to make, they're spending a lot of money in marketing and just getting their um, name out there, right? So that tends to be AAA. And then
Yeah, it's like a blockbuster, Hollywood blockbuster.
yeah, there tends to, every now and then we have the darlings that kind of come out that are not quite AAA, like the Elden Rings, the Demon Souls, these games that come out of Japan that don't quite have the same budget, but they certainly crunch their developers to the bones and make it. And the players love it. And I have no problem with those games in terms of like the playability of it. I certainly have a problem with the development method of like, well, should people be working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day?
Sure.
Right. Probably not. But these are amazing people. It's like it's like the Miyazaki's kind of like studios of the world. So, but when you really kind of harken back, then in the last, I'd say decade, there's been a lot of games that have come out that are made for 20 million or less and often 5 million or less.
Yeah.
And these are games that kind of like touch on, they're unique, they're weird, they're strange. Um, they don't have realistic graphics. They tend to
Yep.
be stylized. They tend to uh, ignore the affordances in design that we normally expect. And they have a smaller market, but who they connect with and how they connect tends to be really strong. And
Right.
if you know film, I mean, I'm going to like speak to myself for a second. Like David Lynch, I love David Lynch. He's weird and I don't recommend David Lynch to anybody, but David Lynch and I will, for whatever reason, I love his films. Right.
Yep.
And I love Jermaine Clement and Taika Waititi and their weird films every now and then. And these kind of like strange little small films that sometimes get pulled into Marvel for whatever reason, or Mandalorian, it's like,
Yeah.
I applaud it, it's like Kevin Smith and Clerks, these small budget films. It's similar with the indie world. And, it's where I want change to go. I don't want games to be all about combat and all about selling a power fantasy for like,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
that's funny. I never thought of it like that, but I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's like, if you think about it, you go all the way back to like, Galaga and these arcade games, the reason they work, well, I'm like, I'm going to stop myself for a second just to, because I can go on a rant right now.
Okay. Okay. So I'll ask you some, I guess I'm not sure if this is relevant to the listener, but it's relevant to me. So I'm going to ask anyway. So when you look at a game like Granny or Five Nights at Freddy or Slay the Princess that are arguably ugly and
Mhm.
overly simplistic, like that doesn't bother you.
It used to.
Hmm.
It used to. I really wanted games to be the best that they could be. And now I'm realizing there's a charm to the weirdness.
Yep.
And weirdness is like, and if we love the weird, uh, if I, there was a moment, and actually, you can see it now. Even you look at like any game commercial or game trailer, you look for best games of 2023 or best games of 2024 on YouTube. I guarantee you're going to see a lot of games that look really similar
Yeah.
because all that money is going into realism and a sense of a zeitgeist of even if it's not pure realism, there's a zeitgeist of style that is pushing on technology and pushing on well, just the like the expense essentially,
Yep.
like much like Avatar or anything else. And there's a moment where you just sit back and like these games all look the same. And then like 10 years ago, it was like they were all like desaturated in art and with and Gears of War was the big one, which happened to be Epic Games, which now makes Fortnite, and they sold it off to Microsoft. But the point is like dirty, gritty textures was the thing in back in the day, and now we're moving so far into realism, and that if you aren't looking so amazing and like I hate this word, but filmic, maybe cinematic,
Yep.
then are you really like is your dollar worth it? If you're spending 60, 70, $80 plus DLC and
Yeah,
battle
as the
pass,
customer, yeah.
yeah, then like, are you getting your money's worth really? And that's kind of the question there. And
Right.
but if you look at indie games, they have to compete on a different scale, because if you compete on realism, then I call it's an arms race, and you just can't compete with these big dogs.
Right. So you need to go in the other direction almost and just be like, yeah, we're obviously not playing that game because, like, look at Bendy and the Ink Machine or Little Nightmares or something. It's like,
Slay the Spire. It's like like it's a beautiful game, but it's weird and it's strange, and it's not done by a traditional artist. It's almost outsider art, and but the game is so beautifully crafted.
what's that one called?
Slay the Spires. So it's like it's a card game. It's a there's a whole genre now called rogue likes and rogue lights, and it's you will die every time you play. And that's the point. And
Yeah.
the point is, but every time you play, you are earning something that will make your next run uh, easier or more interesting.
Wild.
And it's for indie game developers, it happens to be an efficient way of making games, because you can keep adding on content as you and have a live product.
Right. So you can kind of build as you lay the tracks in front of the train, so to speak.
Yes, and players don't. It is if I make a Tomb Raider, I'm doing level 1, level 2, level 3, and there's a sequential narrative. And if I happen to update the game and say, "Oh, hey, you beat the game," or "You're in level 3," doesn't matter, where you're 6 months in, I've updated the game with this new content. A lot of players are just going to see that content and see it's not for me. Maybe I've already beat the game, or I that will only really affect level 2. I'm too far in to make that count. But if the game, uh, as a default sort of standard, like the idea is like I keep playing it over and over, and it's my next, I have more unlocks to earn. It it kind of works. And so for indie game developers, it's just been like a growing genre. There's a lot of like ways to think about game development, and what works for a small team is completely different for what works for a large team.
So somebody that's in your sweet spot in terms of indie game consulting, what does that shop usually look like?
It's wild. It's so much smaller than I ever imagined, to be honest. Like these are teams of like 5 to 7 people, and they have a Rolodex, and kind of like which is, I'm sure, an outdated term, of course, but um, like another 10 to 12 people that glom onto the team and become part. But what's great about the contract nature of these extra people is they don't feel like they are obligated to be um, full-time employees with benefits beyond whatever their contracted sort of work is.
And are these usually like, I'm just imagining they're pretty young. Like, are we talking about people in their 20s normally or not necessarily?
I've seen quite a lot of differences. I've seen teams that are working on with primarily South America. I've seen teams that are all hold into one location, because that's what brings them together. I've seen like my own team is I have a separate team in Ohio, and it's what's great about it is the team loves working together and being together. And that's what generates their creativity, right? So, and there's other teams that are, y- yeah, they're for whatever reason, they just gel, even though they're remote, but they, I do think there's a time zone factor. If they're in the same time zone, usually, it's really hard to manage game teams across multiple time zones. Not saying it's possible. The AAA big bear teams, they do it all the time, but getting collaboration across time zones is not the easiest thing. It's very multidisciplinary. So it requires a lot of people coming together and saying, what is the problem? How do we solve it together rather than how do I solve it individually on my own?
What do you offer to these sorts of studios in terms of consulting? Like, what is the issue that they're having? What stage of their business maturity or artistic maturity are they at? You know, like have they done 5 games before and then they would need someone like you, or is this their first rodeo? Like, what's the problem that they're having that you're the best at helping them with?
So- Some of them is pretty great, but uh, I'm going to give you a lot of credit on this one. I what used to be a firefighter.
Hmm.
I used to be called in to a game team that was, say, 6 months from a release. And they had, we'll say, there was one in particular that had something like 12 um, boss fight battles to do for their game. And the main thing about their game was combat. Uh, in game terms, it was third person action. So kind of like a Fortnite kind of thing,
Right.
but uh, they hadn't done any of their boss battles. They had a lot of like levels with enemies, but they needed the, uh, just like the complex, just moments to just capitalize on each level. And I heard that and I just could not imagine getting that done because I like in my mind what they wanted to hit was the top level again triple A big budget style boss battles and I looked at them and I said, you know, the God of War team that is known for boss battles, they have teams of let's say 12 people up to 20 people that are working for at minimum 4 months to a year per boss battle. And you
It's
want
so crazy
and you want me to come in
to do 3 of them in 6 months.
yeah, to do like 12 of them in 6 months. And I was just like, it's not gonna happen. And I was getting these kind of blank stares of like, does not compute. Like they had already agreed to having this game done
You're right.
by a certain
Now,
time.
who's that agreement with?
Well, they're the investors, the people that are giving the money on a milestone basis to have the game done by a certain date.
Okay, and are these just
These would be publishers.
publishers? Okay, thanks.
So the yeah the structure is publishers typically fund the game, whole or in part, and get to sort of like they offer marketing, they offer distribution, they offer uh essentially, and on top of that, all the other things that a developer won't even think about building.
Mhm.
And in return, they recoup their costs at some ratio, like maybe
Right,
70% of the dollar that's earned or so.
right. Okay. Any game publishers that people listening might have heard of just to place it?
Yes, yeah, of course. So you've heard of EA. You've heard of so EA is a third party publisher. That means they are like on their own. They are not owned by a platform. So Microsoft is a first party. They have their own hardware platform. They have the Xbox, right?
Mhm.
So whenever Microsoft is publishing a game that's their own, they probably don't mind spending a little bit more because it's probably selling hardware also.
Yep.
Same thing with Sony with the PlayStation. Same thing with Nintendo. These are all first party platforms.
Mm.
EA 2K, Rockstar, those are the third party publishers. And then from there, what was the other one? Oh, Activision Blizzard, right? So that's another.
Well, didn't Microsoft buy Blizzard?
They did just buy, yeah, they've been in, I don't know, I think it may have just gone through. I think there was what is it called? Some antitrust process to get through. So I don't know if they totally got through that yet, but I think it's pretty much hit all the gates. So Activision Blizzard was the biggest third party up until recently when Microsoft bought it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's super helpful. All right, so the cliffhanger, what happened with the 12 boss battles in your
Oh,
deer in the headlights team?
or team, I moved away. I literally walked away, and we just could not come to an agreement of working together. It was almost like we were speaking a different language. And so, to answer your question, I changed my positioning because I didn't want to be a firefighter anymore. I wanted to prevent fire.
Mhm.
And so, excuse me, take a sip of water here.
Sure.
Through talking to you, I realized, what if I get in on the funding positioning? What
Mhm.
if I help them get funding, and when they're pitching the investors and asking for a certain amount of money, we will, I can help them, developers and studios, uh, ask for the right amount of money for the game that they're making. And pitching the concept of, this is the game, this is the film, or this is the game we want to build. And if we want to do 12 boss battles, then we know what it's going to cost. We know how we're going to do it.
Mhm.
So we're asking for the right amount of money. We're setting up the team in the right way to make sure that we have it done right. And we're being pretty honest and authentic in what we're pitching.
Right, just realistic.
Yeah. So
Okay.
that's been my angle ever since. And it's been a lot of fun. I work with smaller teams, which is, constraints are good, Jonathan.
Oh, yeah. You need them.
Shit. It's like, wait a second. What if we don't do stealth and melee fighting and ranged fighting and all this other stuff? What if we just like sink it down to the core fantasy of the game and make it as unique as possible? So that's been the way that we do it, and the teams, I think, generally like really enjoy the core thrust of the vision that they end up with. And it's not my vision, it's their vision, right?
Mm. So that kind of right sizing the budget and the vision would happen before the indie studio has it's when they're negotiating a deal with some publisher, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and then would you hang around to kind of troubleshoot or oversee or maybe be a sounding board along the way, or is that the
It's
end?
more like I'm a sounding board. I'm not, there's no overseeing. By that point, I've set them with their core constraints so well that we kind of just have an ongoing sort of relationship. And then there's one team, it's, I'll just call them Tim and John right now. They have a project called The Feast, and they've been working on it for, gosh, like I feel like it's 3 years, but they give me updates every few months in terms of like, hey Joe, this is where we're at. This is what we're doing. This is sort of the core thrust of our game, and we've identified a publisher that is going to work with us, and so forth. And I think even right now they're putting together what they call the Joe build of the game, so they can like really update me on where it's gone from where they started.
Nice. And so is that a formal relationship or is that just sort of a post client?
That's a post client thing that I do. And then once they get funding, I imagine we'll be working together again. And that's kind of the intent of it. Like my goal of all of this is to sort of like have sort of like I don't know what the word is, but a, a group of sustainable indie studios that not necessarily are looking at me for advice, but are all sort of working together and sharing their experience with each other. I've had so many studios that I've worked with in the more AAA space that has shut down catastrophically, where like 400 people in the Boston, Rhode Island, and Baltimore areas lost their
Oh yeah,
job.
I know the Rhode Island story. Yeah,
Yeah. And there's not enough game companies there to absorb the employees that need hiring, right? So
right.
that's probably it ends up being like 300 people that kind of, and that's 300 employees, which represents probably like, another like easily 1,000 people that have to move.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's a pandemic and everything. And so it's just it's not a sustainable way to like inflate the pitch and the concept to investors, and then hire big, and then if it doesn't work, lay off people, especially once people start having families. So a large part of what I'm doing is try to like model a better way of doing it.
interesting. Very interesting. Okay, so what what is the model that you're using to sort of fund your whatever your lifestyle is? Like, how are you putting Cheerios in the bowl with this kind of consulting business?
uh, what was the question? How do I put
Yeah, like Cheerios in the bowl. Like, how do
Cheers and
you?
okay, yeah, yeah, okay.
Yeah, where's your cash flow come from? Is the
Yeah, so I was really fortunate because when I made the decision to be a consultant, I was a director at a publisher. So I was part of the funding um, apparatus, and I was able to convince my boss to, well, actually, he offered, he said, will you work with us on a contract basis as a consultant? And like literally asking me if I would work for him on a contract basis as I'm trying this consulting venture out, which was amazing because now I've got access to AAA funding, and I didn't know I wanted to do indie consulting at this time, but I had my first client essentially, which was my former employer.
yeah, that's actually kind of common. Not maybe 50% of the time, but a lot of folks who get started in consulting, their first client is their last employer. It's not totally rare for people listening like that. If you're still in-house, that can be a really nice sort of escape route.
I and yeah, and I did not expect that from my boss, but I really I thank him very much. And even to this day, like it was last year, he's called me twice to like work on a couple projects.
Cool.
So I will always work on the larger projects or the people that I have these deeper relationships with.
Mhm.
Um, well, at this point now, I've really honed it into a 2 week evaluation, and I will never make an exception at this point to that 2 week evaluation because everybody says what they think they need. And well, I'm not saying they're wrong, but like I have to make sure that I know what I'm getting into before I start pricing things or
Right.
say yes to things.
Yep.
So I always have a sliding scale based on essentially what I perceive their budget to be. And I'm really good now at this point at understanding, figuring out what their budget might be. And indie games are not big. They're like, like I said, 5 million or less. They're like usually like 2 million or less. So they don't got a whole lot of money, but I'll say, here's what it is. I'll do a 2 week evaluation. And in the first week, I will speak with all your stakeholders. I'll look at all your materials, whether you've got a build of the game or not, or just pitch materials and documents. And then I will have a meeting at the end of the first week with the stakeholders and kind of give you my verbal take on assessment on how things are going. And it's really just kind of like just see if I'm on the right track. And maybe there's something we're missing. And this happened a few times where we're like, oh shit, well, sorry. We forget that like we forgot to like even show Joe this entire like section of the documents or the game. And I go, oh, okay, great. Cool. I got that. And then at the end of the second week, I've got a written document and it's clean and it's a PDF, and it essentially just boils it down to the really big things that they need to be aware of. And there's couple pages of minor things, but I make sure it's usually about 3 to 5 really big things that if they're not making these changes, uh, they will. The reason they call me is for a reason. I don't know what it is, but these 5 things or 3 to 5 things are affecting their products, and they have to make these changes. And I don't need to be there to make these changes. This is for them to do,
Hmm.
and that's the main thing. And then I go over that with them, and come up usually after that. Here's couple offerings that I'll do. And those offerings have evolved into um essentially like advisor according to like a milestone. They may have a milestone that they're trying to hit in order to get their next round of funding, or maybe they've got a specialist kind of gameplay thing that they need to hit, and they don't have the leadership that they need, but they have got somebody interested in working on that space. And so I call it like design mentor. And so I'll work with that person like twice a week, whatever cadence of like development that they do. And let's talk about what you're working on this week. I will give you all the advice that I can in order to make sure that you hit your milestones. And then next week, let's review your work. And it tends to be after 3 months, whatever
Hmm.
like lack of confidence that they had in this sort of junior person, they just, they get it. They call it the eye of Sauron, right? I, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that makes sense. So it's like in development, there's like so many things that can go wrong. And when like the area of, gameplay that I'm known for, uh, goes wrong, it's like everybody knows about it. Everybody's looking about it. They're trying to fix it. And that's why I get called. And then 3 months later, they don't worry about it anymore. So they just like, great, Joe, it's been great. We've hit our milestone. Everything's good. And I've created a relationship with some new designers and animators and programmers. And I don't know that I'm always available for them if they have future questions.
Cool. So what in your message or that kind of kicked this off, like what you mentioned finding the sweet spot where the work almost becomes too easy. Like, is this is this the sweet spot? Like this, the Eye of Sauron offering, or the just sort of like giving them a clear-eyed assessment of where they're currently at and what the challenges are probably going to be getting from where they are to where they want to go.
I think so. I think the I will still do the evaluation. I'm getting to the point now where I've got 80% confidence of what the evaluation will result um, in the first 15 minutes of the conversation.
Yep, that is called a cold read, and it comes from working with the same. No, I shouldn't say the same kinds of code, but it's like being very specialized on a kind of client allows you to get past, to graduate from having a why conversation every single time into doing a cold read where you can take a look around just based on obvious characteristics of the firm and take a pretty good guess, like you said, 80% guess of like, let me guess, you've got this problem, this problem, this problem, and they're like, oh my god, what do you have, ESP?
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's even the budget, or they'll say, we've got a co-development team in Sweden or whatever it is. And they'll mention something, and that's all I need to hear to understand what it is that and also the relationship of who it is that's calling me. Right. And that's all it takes. And I, it's not, I don't take any pride in figuring it out fast. I don't want to. In fact, I would rather just be like, okay, I think I know where this is going, but keep it open, because every now and then I'm surprised
Sure.
by
Yep.
what it is.
Yep.
So it's kind of like having that kind of open-minded curiosity of it. But where it becomes easy now is I don't have to overthink it. I'm not spending my spare cycles in between meetings wondering and trying to figure it out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah, I have my process. It doesn't take many hours. It's a few meetings that it takes, and then it's done. And then I've got even the document that I give them, I I I almost am embarrassed to say that, like, it's starting to get to the point where I can copy and paste
Yeah.
a lot of the suggestions and assessments and just change a few words. And, like, I don't want it to be the case, but that is the case where I could do that, and it is that easy.
That 100% comes from focus. I had the same thing years ago. I used to do a similar kind of thing where I would do these roadmaps for freelancers and consultants who were, they're just like, I don't know what to do. I need someone to tell me what to do. And so I'd interview them and then I'd write up this big report and it got longer and longer and longer as I added things to it.
Mm.
And then over time I was like, there's basically only two versions of this report that I create.
Yeah.
I'm
Like,
giving all the same, I ended up turning it into a book. I'm like, it's just,
mm,
you don't have
mm,
to, and I canceled the road mapping thing. I'm like, if you're like this, A, B, and C, you're
mm,
basically a new freelancer, read this
mm,
book and it's going to be 90% of what you need to hear. So, just for the listener, this is purely from focusing, being really specific about who you work with. And over time, you could, I'm not saying you, Joe, but you listener can say, oh, I've kind of got this dialed. Maybe I'm going to go up in, a size. And so maybe I'm going to start handling bigger clients in the same vertical, or maybe I'm going to go to an adjacent vertical, or maybe I'm going to do something, I'm going to tackle a new area, but using my same process and skills and create this sort of new, boilerplate is overstating it, but the same sort of product in another vertical. So the reason I say that is because it's not really limiting. It doesn't limit you at all. It just makes it easier. It frees up your time and creative
that's
energy,
great.
just like you said in the message. And you can kind of, you know, you can be pretty confident you're going to hit a double every time you get up to the plate. At least a double. It'd be weird if you struck out. And it's a great feeling to have that sense of a high degree of competence when you walk into a situation like this, having that confidence of the competence, kind of hard to say.
Mhm.
Uh, it's a feeling that you get addicted to, and if you, again, not you, Joe, but in historically speaking, it used to seem fun to me to like jump into a brand new situation with every client and like learn their industry and all that stuff. But once you know an industry and once you don't have to go through all of that learning curve and you can just hit the ground running, you don't really, I think most people don't want to go back to that kind of like noob 101. Oh, how does money flow through the business? How do you attract clients?
Right.
It's like,
Right.
if you have to ask all of those questions, sometimes from a consulting standpoint, it is the case that a client really needs an outsider to bring in fresh eyes. But a lot of times it's not the case. They just need someone who knows their industry or, whatever the thing is about them that is unique and or not unique, but to their space,
Mhm.
and come in and be like, let me guess, you've got these 5 problems. And they're like, yeah, not the fifth one, but the other four. Yeah. And then we've got this other one. It's really, really, it's an example of creating leverage in your business, like an expertise business. That is one way to create leverage where you don't have to waste a ton of time doing research and getting up to speed. You can just hit the ground running, but super important. I'm glad you called this out. It's super important to keep an open mind because you don't know everything and you might be surprised sometimes.
Yeah. And every time if I feel like I act like I know it and uh say too much too early, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot because
Been there.
it's like
Yeah.
there's just some nuance there that's a little bit like unspoken. Whoever calls me, maybe it's sometimes it's like I've dealt with companies that have three partners, and the dynamic of the three partners is such that there are things that can't be said in the presence of the three,
Uh-huh.
like come out over the course of my evaluation, right?
Yeah.
And, and for whatever, and I have an ability because by not saying anything early, I'm able to say it later and it be more effective.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the clock on the wall. I know we both have to run to other things. So this has been super helpful. Thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you for letting me just like talk about my work over the last few years. Like, and then honestly, like when you were first telling me about how consulting could be this way, I felt it was true, but it felt so weird and strange. And now I'm like, oh yes, okay, great, I love it. It's true. And now I'm telling other people, but I feel like I'm speaking in different language to them sometimes, and
Yeah.
yeah, so it's great to talk to you and like reflect back. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm living it now. It's great.
That's awesome. Glad to hear it. Cool. Where can people go to find out more about you? What's your website, or do you have social media if people want to have follow up questions, or if they know an indie studio that might need your help, something like that?
Yeah, wow, really need to update my website. It's a recurver. It's a recurve with an R at the end, and it's based on archery. And I'll just say the quick stint right there. It's you stand in the same location, you're shooting at a target, and you're a little over or a little under, you adjust, and it's basically just a word for iteration, but recurver.com.
Awesome. Joe Q. Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you, Jonathan.
All right, folks. That's it for this week. I'm Jonathan Stark, and I hope you join me again next time on Ditching Hourly. Bye.